You may be shamed by other people for talking badly about a family member or a spouse or partner, or for sharing your family problems publicly, or speaking badly about a colleague. If you do decide to take action in the relationship, you may be shamed for considering divorce or estrangement from your family. Have you ever had this happen, that they tell you that you're crazy, and then they tell you that they love you in spite of that? So here's the scene. You're in a narcissistic relationship, and you're gaslighted a lot. The upshot of the gaslighting is that you feel insane, confused, and above all else, you believe that there's something wrong with you. Maybe now you think that you're the one who's too sensitive, or that you're an angry person, or that you're too demanding, or fussy, or needy, or that you're a real handful, whatever it is. The gaslighting is not just that you don't remember things or that you aren't in reality, but also that there is something wrong with you. And it happens enough, and if it happened in childhood, it's probably your identity. And basically then, attachment or remaining in this relationship requires that you buy into this idea that you are the crazy, foolish, selfish, whatever one. And this is the really dark part. Then they turn around and say, hey, I still love you even though you're a mess. So their gaslighting is largely what has left you feeling like there's something wrong with you. And then over time, sadly, you sort of kind of believe the manipulation. But where people can really get stuck is that when you believe all the bad stuff, I'm too sensitive, I'm too dramatic, I'm a mess, I'm all over the place, whatever it is, that the narcissistic person kind of galvanizes or strengthens the trauma bond by telling you that they're willing to find you lovable, or do find you lovable, despite what a mess you are. And sort of lurking under that is, and you sure are lucky you found me, or have me in your life, because I'm willing to love you despite what a mess that you are. Nobody else would have done that. I have seen this happen time and again in intimate relationships. People being told things like, hey, you're lucky I have an appetite for crazy and drama and a hot mess, and I love you, even though that's who you are. You can see it in family relationships. We all love her chaos and her flakiness. It keeps us from being a boring family. Goodness knows that it's wasted our time and it costs us dearly, but we know that she needs our support. This could happen in workplaces, where you might hear, everybody needs someone who's a little weird like this one to keep staff meetings interesting. We have to be patient with it, and it can get annoying. But we like them being on the team. I'm sure you have your versions, right? And then this can happen in friendships. Oh gosh, we love how OCD she is. It means nothing gets forgotten on the trips. It's a lot to put up with because she can be a really obsessive handful, but we still love her. But the thing that these folks are saying, really, whether it's drama or chaos or weird or OCD, it actually isn't true. It's something that they are saying that you are and accuse you of being, but it's not true. And with time, because they say it so many times, you find yourself almost having to believe it to stay in the relationship. But then it's made to feel like they're doing you a favor for putting up with something that either isn't true about you or may be behavior that only comes out from having to navigate them. For example, you become this so-called OCD person because you have to stay on top of myriad details that an entitled or selfish friend can't be bothered with, and you have staved off disasters by staying on top of those details. The real challenge and key to surviving these relationships is to not believe the gaslighting narrative being given to you about who you are, whatever that is. Because if you hear something enough, you start to believe it. And especially in narcissistic family systems. Even if you're just being portrayed as the kooky or chaotic or dramatic one, at least it gives you some kind of discernible identity in a system that often has your identity shift based on what the narcissistic people want or need from you at any given moment. But by not buying into that narrative, then you have a fighting chance of seeing that their twisted conditional love, I love you even though you're needy. I love how weird you are. I really love how OCD you are. That either leaves you feeling like that A, nobody else would put up with you, and aren't you lucky that they do, or B, you aren't really lovable, and C, you're being liked for something about you that may not necessarily feel true. Well, needless to say, narcissistic relationships are where healthy love goes to die. And this isn't just unhealthy, it's distorted. Pay attention to this dynamic, and when you are told you are something that doesn't feel right or that it doesn't fit you, analyze it and ask, where did that characterization of me come from? Because that is often the fiction that is part of the whole gaslighted mess. And if they say that is why they love you, because you're messy and needy and crazy, and those things aren't true, then definitely the whole equation is out of whack because they love you for something that isn't true. What the hell does that mean? Healing is about knowing who you are. And the more we learn, that the less vulnerable we are to internalizing the gaslighted narratives we're hearing. But if you grew up with this, it feels like developing your identity is like inventing the wheel. A place where this can really, really get tricky is, in some cases, the things that they may be accusing you of, like, oh gosh, you are so depressed, you are so anxious, but still love you. And you may be depressed and anxious. So the thing that they're saying that I love you and I'm putting up with this thing, once again, it does put you on your back foot. This sense that, okay, these things are true about me. For example, maybe it's not just that you're highly organized or have to stay on top of details, that you may in fact have OCD or OCD adjacent characteristics. And those are things you may be working on in therapy or depression or anxiety or anything. That you're basically being told like, yeah, you're not well, but I still love you. And that entire feeling can always lead you to feel like you're always in a precarious position in these relationships. But ultimately, these are never places where you ever feel fully safe. And then when you do find out that you're being loved because of something that's not true about you, if you thought these relationships weren't confusing before, they can always get worse. So the trauma bond has so many different variations and faces. Let's talk about the anger and self-loathing trauma bond. The trauma bond is generally created by an alternation and vacillation going between periods of normal and unhealthy. And these backs and forths can be between really good and bad. A fun partner where you have some good days, for example, alternating with them cheating or just being an overall a-hole. Or between normal and bad. Nothing fancy, but just a normal-ish person, but then who will fly into rages or give you the silent treatment for things that they weren't raging about the day before. Or the trauma bond may be a vacillation between bad and really bad. A relationship that never feels good, but some days they actually don't yell and humiliate you, and other days they do. The trauma bond comes from a place of attempting to make an attachment to an unstable person or situation. And so typically, like I said, it quite often happens in childhood. It can, and that's where it's most pronounced. In adult relationships, it can happen as well. And it always creates a sense of cognitive dissonance. And we make excuses to reduce that tension, and then we get stuck. But there is another darker twist on the trauma bond that I don't talk about enough, but some of you may be experiencing. In my healing program recently, we finished a month on anger, right? The anger anyone who has been in a narcissistic relationship experiences when they think about the relationship, right? Anger is not just a narcissist game. We feel anger too. These relationships make us angry, right? But they're not safe spaces in which to share our anger. In fact, we may not even know how to express our anger. And on top of that, we are often quite unsettled by the narcissistic person's anger. So it becomes a very fraught space. But we do get angry in these relationships and may often keep it bottled up for a long time. So we may find that when we do finally express it, a lot comes out, and we are also finding ourselves a bit explosive. We're feeling explosive instead of just the narcissistic person, or it's just anger finally just comes out, and that we find ourselves responding to the injustice and the betrayal and the manipulations, and so we may engage in angry behavior too. And that is when we get into a different kind of cycle. I was fielding a question from a few people recently about their own anger. People who say, I get angry. I sometimes actually really react strongly and I say angry things or I raise my voice. And then the narcissistic person, not surprisingly, reacts back and we go back and forth. And these are people who said, it isn't me to get this frothed up. But they also shared that they struggle with the relationship. They want to get out. They can't get out for a variety of reasons. However, something really driving the stuck, trauma-bonded cycle is that they feel that they are now part of the problem because they are also the angry one. And then they slip into thinking that, well, maybe I'm just as bad as them. And then the slippery slope of, well, I can't manage my anger either. I need to work on it becomes an issue. And while healthy anger expression is a great thing for all of us to learn, you can see how the perception that you have an anger problem is what may keep you stuck in an unhealthy relationship where you are being chronically baited and betrayed and humiliated. But the anger trauma bond, as it were, feels a little different because even other people witnessing your relationship may write it off as two volatile people in a relationship. In people who are in narcissistic relationships, who do readily express their anger in the relationship, there may be another sticky cycle where you get angry in the relationship, and then you apologize, angry, apologize, angry, apologize. And it's just that cycle creates a sort of trauma-bonded cement. Because you do constantly feel bad for relating your anger. You're told by the narcissistic person in the relationship you're doing a bad thing. And then you express your anger, which may look bad. So for people who are stuck in these angry, trauma-bonded cycles, it can be even more difficult to unstuck because you feel you're part of the problem, really, in a significant way. And when a narcissistic person demonstrates their anger, they feel entitled to that anger. If they ever apologize, which is rare, the apologies will be hollow. They don't learn. The narcissistic person has no empathy for how this anger has affected the other person. And when a person who is not narcissistic shows that anger, they may feel overwhelmed, they may apologize and feel guilty for a long time. They don't feel entitled to that anger and are often quite ashamed by it. And you may worry and ruminate about how your anger hurt other people, ultimately feeling like a bad person for expressing the anger the way you did. We often have a template, this idea that a survivor of a narcissistic relationship is someone who is broken down by the ongoing manipulation and invalidation and shaming and gaslighting and betrayal. Many survivors are overregulated, they're numb, they're mildly dissociated. They don't express negative emotions, not sadness or anger or anything. You don't express your needs. And so that template of a survivor, overregulated, not showing emotion, we're actually hoping to see more emotion, doesn't always reconcile with this idea of someone who might be in a narcissistic relationship, being harmed in all the ways, but someone who also expresses their anger, fights back a little bit. And the fight response is a standard sympathetic nervous system response. Because anger is such a central part of the presentation of a narcissistic person, it is not unusual for people who do express anger, despite also being narcissistically abused, to wonder, I must be narcissistic too, or at least a lot like them. So you can imagine that this response would result in a person sometimes just thinking that they are part of the problem, as I said, and not getting the support and help that they need. Anger by itself is not the problem. Anger becomes a problem depending on how it's expressed and how it's regulated, and also how we manage the aftermath after we do express anger. It's also recognizing that there are things in life that are angering: injustice, breaches of trust, betrayal, insults, gaslighting. So when they happen, it is only natural that we would respond angrily. Unfortunately, then the standard advice is, well, then get out if you're always feeling so angry. If this person keeps doing hurtful stuff, try and communicate, which is obviously not an option. And then, sadly, most people will still blame the person who is having the bad things happen to them because they're angry. And since leaving is often not an option, things that make you angry will likely keep happening in this relationship. And then the lion's share of regulating the anger is on you. People who are in these relationships who do respond with anger, it's not abnormal. And as I say, often results in this ongoing anger apology cycle. But this group of folks who does express or do express anger often gets lost in the conversation when we're talking about narcissistic abuse, because the people who respond with anger are often critiqued for how they are sharing or managing their anger. And then the work goes to the anger. We focus on the anger of the person who's actually being hurt by the toxic dynamics, which is fine, but it can't be the sole focus. In some ways, having some anger about what is happening in the narcissistic relationship is a good thing. It's a recognition of the injustice and the harm, and that's good. It fosters the radical acceptance and the other shifts that are needed for healing. But breaking out of the cycle of, well, maybe I'm the problem and I'm the angry person, can really make the trauma-bonded cycle significantly harder to break. In narcissistic relationships, expressed anger, the anger you show, doesn't tend to work in the long term, largely because it creates a perpetual cycle. They keep doing invalidating things, you respond with anger, back and forth forever, and it often escalates. So it then becomes a mix of things: seeing the relationship clearly, understanding that while feeling angry makes sense, it becomes about finding new ways to express it. It becomes about disengagement and radical acceptance, and then figuring out next steps. But if you see this pattern in yourself, and especially if you sense it is bleeding into other places, for example, you find yourself just generally feeling angry most of the time, or a general sense of irritability, or that your fuse is getting shorter and shorter with people who aren't doing the things that the narcissistic person is doing, or that your anger is just getting more and more reactive, then seeking out help and self-awareness become absolutely key. Anger, as I said, is a normal emotion, but in a narcissistic relationship, it gets very messy. It's a part of grief, it's a part of depression, and it is definitely a part of the process of being in a narcissistic relationship. But getting clear on it so you don't get into a sticky, superglued trauma bond that is harder to get out of than most becomes crucial. And then take that anger and see if you can channel it in ways that are good, or at least better, for you. The narcissistic relationship often brings up anger because we are powerless and helpless. Anger is a reminder that it is not a good feeling, but it all comes down to finding those ways to express it. The feeling is fine. Again, it's the expression that matters. A person can be angry and empathic and self-aware and not entitled and not grandiose and not manipulative. Keep that clear for yourself and recognize that most of us feel angry in these relationships, but we often suppress it. And that's not good for us either. So you think one shame is bad enough. A double scoop? Probably not great. Now, shame is the prevailing climate of a narcissistic relationship. The narcissistic person is sort of caught in a chronic state of shame. Their vulnerability brings up shame. Their shame leads them to lash out at other people. They are unable to regulate their sense of shame. So shame is just sort of their groove. But they have not cornered the market on shame in the narcissistic relationship. The other person in the narcissistic relationship is also riddled with shame, and it is often doubled because it is created in two different ways for survivors of narcissistic relationship. First, there are the numerous ways that you feel shame because of the relationship. The narcissistic person will literally just project their shame onto you, and in order for the relationship to work, it sort of requires you to internalize their shame and make it your own. People in narcissistic relationships may also feel a sense of shame for being in a relationship that is so dysfunctional, and may even try to hide the relationship, not talk about it, or talk about it in a way that isn't true just to dodge the shame. Then there is the shame that the relationship may bring up for you because other people in your world are being hurt by the narcissistic person. This may be strangers that you encounter that the narcissistic person yells at, or your children if you're co-parenting with them, or your family members, just anyone you care about. You watch them be treated badly by the narcissistic person. You may not feel that there's much you can do about it, and you may also have a sense of shame that this person is even a part of your life. And then there is the exposure to having all of you shamed. Your needs, your aspirations, your identity. You're shamed for having a want or a need, and the narcissistic person will often communicate that through their resentment of your needs, and you then carry that shame for feeling bad or guilty for wanting or needing, and being indoctrinated into believing that you are shameful for actually having those needs or wants. But that, sadly, is not the end of the shame street in these relationships. Then there is the shaming that happens from the world at large. Narcissistic behavior and what happens in narcissistic relationships. It's still not fully understood by most people. So if you're going through a narcissistic relationship, you can often feel quite alone because people really often don't really get it. Like I said, if you speak badly about the relationship or the narcissistic person, you may be shamed by other people for talking badly about a family member or a spouse or partner, or for sharing your family problems publicly, or speaking badly about a colleague. If you do decide to take action in the relationship, you may be shamed for considering divorce or estrangement from your family. If you keep struggling with the relationship, you may be shamed for not being able to get over it, for not being able to make it work, or perhaps for having unrealistic expectations. And this 1-2 shame punch can mean that it is all but impossible to make sense of these relationships, to heal from them, and to get past them. Shame is a prison, an internalization of the sense that there is something wrong or damaged about you, that you are not good enough, and that this is something that is judged by the world. The internalized shame that survivors of these relationships experience is bad enough. But when the world is echoing that sentiment, it can feel impossible to find a way out of it. Listen, as a therapist who has worked with hundreds of folks experiencing narcissistic abuse, the shame, as I observe it happening for them, comes out in many ways. I've seen folks become socially isolated, experiencing social anxiety, holding back on their aspirations, keeping their needs silenced, feeling numb, feeling sad, being anxious. And what I've also observed is when these experiences, that when they talk about the experiences in their narcissistic relationship are taken out in the world, when a person who has survived narcissistic abuse may finally find the strength and courage to talk about it with other people, there may actually be an experience of being doubted or questioned, or being told like, oh, it's not really abusive, nobody hit you, or that maybe they're being harsh for saying someone's narcissistic. And it almost calcifies those patterns and leads to more isolation and more holding back. The entire narcissistic relationship is a study in shame. And the narcissistic person's shame is projected onto the world. Now, sadly, narcissistic shame, I really believe this is true, has rewritten, or written, I should say, not even rewritten, written the course of human history. Narcissistic world leaders with their insecure and fragile egos, once their shame reaches a boiling point, launch wars and political division and make choices that destroy the most vulnerable people in a society. That's the big view. But whether it's your close relationship or the world at large, the unchecked shame of narcissistic people may actually result in a more harmful experience of shame for the people in these relationships. And what really makes it, again, sort of a double hit, double jeopardy of shame, as it were, is that not only is there the shame that happens within the relationship, but the ongoing shaming that happens from the many people out there who do not understand what the landscape of a narcissistic relationship looks like. Well, helplessness is a classical part of a narcissistic relationship, but there are two very distinct forms of helplessness in a narcissistic relationship, and frankly, there are probably a lot more than two. But there are two central kinds, and this can leave people feeling like they are just not healable from these relationships, which is simply not true. So, what's the first helplessness? The first helplessness is that original helplessness of finding that nothing that you are doing in the relationship is working. And generally, this first original helplessness happens before you know anything about narcissism. This first helplessness may have lasted for your entire childhood, because a child really can't get their heads around narcissism. And even if they could, the issues of attachment and survival will take precedence. The first helplessness comes out of wanting the love story to continue, the love bombing and early days of idealization, and truly believing that you were being seen like you never were in your life to come back. The first helplessness is about not being able to find the right way to say it, whatever you're trying to say to them, from believing that you actually have to mind read the narcissist and really trying to do it. It comes from trying to be perfect. And then the one small thing you get wrong, the one misplaced phrase, the not being exactly what they want, blowing up the entire day. This first original helplessness comes from having a series of good enough days, and then bam, it turns into an angry, silent treatment, manipulative mess, and you can't figure out what set them off. The first helplessness is a combination of not knowing what to do and believing that it is something in you that must be unfixable since nothing is working. It's the origin of why survivors of narcissistic relationships feel as though they are broken. The first helplessness could last for a lifetime if they don't learn about narcissism. And if you do learn about narcissism, you are often taken to the second helplessness. And this is the helplessness that can come out of the grief after radical acceptance. The second helplessness is the hope being dismantled. It's the having to give up on the idea that things may change significantly, that there is something you can do to fix it, to make it better. The second helplessness is having to shift into the realistic expectations. The second helplessness can bring up feelings of guilt and grief and anger. It feels different. You start seeing the patterns. You know it's a thing, but you may be resistant. Now you may wonder, am I just going to have to accept that I'm stuck in one of these helplessnesses in perpetuity? No. Radical acceptance, sort of done right, and alongside healing, becomes about not feeling helpless as much as being able to clearly see the limitations of the relationship, to learn to engage with it differently, to recognize that there are things this relationship, this person cannot do, and it's not about you. There can be a sadness, a resignation, a heaviness, but it's no longer a helplessness. You know what you need to do and what can't be done, and you may not like it, but you do it. Listen, you may get hoovered and go back to that second helplessness and then go through it and learn a little more and land on a more solid radical acceptance. And there may be times in life we do get to radical acceptance. But life happens, and we need the narcissistic person to do something, sign a form, go to a hospital, and it is not happening. And the second helplessness comes flowing back again. And then we climb back out. Sometimes the less contact you have with the narcissistic person, the more that second helplessness can fade. But helplessness sucks. It can be the prelude to depression, feelings of worthlessness, and general apathy, and a why even get out of bed sort of sensation. But understanding the different things and the different kinds of helplessnesses that narcissistic relationships teach us shows us that knowledge is crucial to healing, and so too is grief. Over time, the helplessness can and often will lift. And sure, there will be other negative mood states that pass through like sadness, but that locked up feeling of helplessness does gradually abate. And I promise you, it feels like liberation. So I want you to think and ask yourself, was there a time in your life you said no to an opportunity, to trying something, to taking a risk because you knew it would rock the boat in your narcissistic relationship? This boat rocking could be because the narcissistic person in your life explicitly said, I don't want you to do this. Or if you do this, then, and whatever ultimatum it was. And the implication was that your choice here could irretrievably harm the relationship you have with them. And then you would be to blame if anything happened. Or maybe it wasn't that explicit, but it was unsaid. That if you do this, you take whatever this opportunity is, then you won't have as much time. You'll need to move away for a time. You'll be distracted. And it was sort of understood that if you did that, then it would mean that you were being selfish, putting other things ahead of the relationship, doing what mattered to you, or not accounting for their feelings, even when you had consulted with them and talked with them at length. In some cases, it was a hard no. And without maybe the financial or other kinds of support or shared, sort of stuff you had with your narcissistic person in your life, you couldn't pull off doing the opportunity or taking the chance. Or maybe it was a parent who was supporting you. You couldn't have done it without really jumping into the abyss. For example, it would have meant ending the relationship or turning your back on a family of origin, or having support that you were partly reliant on all be pulled, or even in the most extreme cases, a threat of harm or violence. Listen, I'm not talking about situations where your confidence was so sapped by the narcissistic relationship that you didn't feel capable of making the best choice, or you were nervous about taking a chance because you didn't think you could make it work. This is something different. Because heaven knows that is most people who might have grown up with a narcissistic family system or have been in a long-term relationship with a narcissistic person. In the case of what I'm talking about here, I am talking about doing something that you wanted to try, that mattered to you, like taking a career risk or a school or a life risk. But it was clear that if you did do that thing, then the relationship would end, or you would lose the person, or you'd lose people, or you just couldn't bring yourself to do it because the opportunity was so clearly laughed at or shamed, like, oh, please don't do that. That's for losers, or only a fool would do that, or there's no way you could make that work, or you're going to blow up everything for your little fantasy. I'm not even going to talk about this with you. We're done. So there was no taking the opportunity because it was sort of dead on arrival. Now, looking back, you may have thought, damn, I wish I had just done the thing and lost the relationship at the time, but it is not that simple. That's not how you felt at the time. At the time, you may have truly loved them, been committed to the relationship, and the relationship may have mattered to you a lot. You may have already been blaming yourself for any problems in the relationship and thought, well, gosh, maybe I am the problem. And of course, yes, I am being selfish, or of course I'm dumb for wanting to do this. Maybe they're right. Maybe these problems in this relationship are because of me. So them saying no, or I will be done with you, or you won't be able to make this work in your life and you're going to ruin your life, which you may have already been worried about, well, that made the decision for you. And then you may not have done whatever this thing was, whatever this opportunity was. And this fork in the road, this chance to make this choice, it could have been anything from moving away to go to school, going to a specific college, taking a job transfer that was offered to you so you could have more opportunity in the company or have the opportunity to live someplace else, starting your own business. Hell, even something like, I don't know, something smaller. It could be like taking a role in a community theater production or doing a podcast. Sometimes these risks don't involve just upending your life or moving away. And this regret could have happened within a narcissistic family system, or a family member that strongly discouraged you or prohibited you from taking this opportunity, or a partner who stopped you, or even what you thought at the time was a well-intentioned mentor or boss, but really wasn't. One of the major fallouts of any narcissistic relationship or abuse or behavior is regret. We regret what happened to us. We regret not seeing it sooner. We regret the things we said. We regret it ever happened. We regret the time we lost. It's just a big old pile of regret. These lost opportunities can often be big ones. They could have been life-changing ones. Yes, there are the regrets people might have of, I regret I ever married this person. I regret I ever had a child with this person. Or I regret I was ever from this family, or agreed to move closer to my siblings, or whatever it is. That's one set of regrets. But then there are the things you gave up because of this relationship. And it's tricky because the perception, not only from yourself, but even the world, is that you did this to yourself. You're the one who made the choice. And heaven knows, like I said, the world probably feels that way too. And the narcissistic person probably did this to you too and said, well, I didn't tell you to actually not do it. You're the one who decided not to take this opportunity. Again, it's only in some cases where the narcissistic person really and truly lays down an ultimatum and expressly forbids you from doing it. In most cases, it's more of a manipulative maneuver. I never told you to not do that thing. I just said I don't want to be in a long-distance relationship. Or, I didn't want you to get hurt when this thing didn't work out. So ultimately, you may have said no because you still wanted the relationship to work, or you believed you would fail, and they reinforced that. And people would have said to you, well, you got to take responsibility for your choices. So you may even feel that you failed yourself. The trauma bond, the confusion, the manipulation, the loss of belief in ourselves, the basic human need to stay connected to relationships that we value at the time that we're forced into these choices, all of that means that these forks in the road can feel impossible, and risks are never easy. So if someone comes along and sort of makes the decision for us, we may know in our guts that saying no to this is not the right decision, but we may have been conflicted about it. And maybe it was just sort of, we were looking for someone to help us feel a little more brave. I have no doubt that most of you have had one crossroads, one fork in your life where you look back and you said, yep, I talked myself out of something that could have been really good for me because I didn't get what was happening in my narcissistic relationship, or I wasn't ready to I wasn't ready to give it up, or I was afraid of losing my family, or I believed it when they said I would fail. And now you may see these patterns much more clearly and say, damn, I didn't get it, and I chose the wrong door. The point of this is not to steep in the regret, but to learn about the people around you. Some people in our lives galvanize our courage, and do it wisely. They will also encourage us to be sure that we look at all the angles. But they don't make the decision about these things for us. They support you in making a choice that works for you. I hope every one of you has maybe one of those people that you can turn to at those crossroads, and then combine that with trusting your instincts and sometimes taking the chances. But I gotta say, in all of this, the biggest mistake that we can make is to turn to a narcissistic person for guidance on life issues that affect you or are meaningful to you, because the narcissistic folks lack the capacity to see it that way. Every decision, even decisions by other people, are solely about them, how it affects them, their triggers, their needs, their wants, their schedule. And so any guidance they give you will get twisted, and any advice will solely be about them. And in these relationships, we're often afraid of losing them, or having to live in their tut-tut-tut about our selfishness, or heaven forbid, if the path we choose doesn't quite work out the way we hope, to have to listen to their I told you so's for the rest of our days, not so nice. And even if you don't literally lose them, that they don't end the relationship, they will use this as ammunition to fortify their assertion that you are so selfish. Even personally, when I look at the handful of forks in the road that I really genuinely feel that I messed up, I take full responsibility for all of them. They were my choices. I also recognize that in some of them, I was very swayed by narcissistic people. People that I didn't want to let down, that I wasn't ready to lose, and that communicated to me in 1,000 ways that somehow I was not good enough, or this choice I wanted to make was embarrassing or ridiculous. When I put the framework of understanding narcissistic relationships on those forks in the road, and I reflect on that, their advice was entirely selfish, self-serving, never accounted for what would have possibly been good for me. And then they turned their back on me when I had some regrets and focused on protecting themselves. They'd say things like, I never told you that you couldn't do it. We lose so much as a result of these relationships. And opportunities are one of those many things. So figure out who your supporters are. And if you do have narcissistic people in your life, don't view them as guides. If you're at a fork, get the guidance you can trust, and you can tell them after you make your decision and you can't turn back. And if you do lose them on the basis of how you choose at one of these forks in the road, then it's a real wake-up call on how conditional the relationship always was. Doesn't mean it won't be hard, and then it's another thing you may regret. Maybe I shouldn't have done this because I lost them. But hopefully, in the long term, that choice you make, that was very much your choice, you can own that, and you can make sense of that lost relationship that in the end wasn't going to be doing you any favors. Thanks again.